emailed back to one of Dave's, I don't know if that went to everybody or not, but it was tell him to give us dates, go over the dates, or make a printout. Typically, if you tell me to do something, I'm probably not going to do that, but that's probably because I'm proud and arrogant. So I figured I'd not be proud or arrogant. I actually did a little chart for you. So those are the dates, and we'll be working our way through that. That really is a chronology of Israel's biblical history. Now, it doesn't include intertestamental time. It does not include intertestamental time. Just so you know that. I did not have time to get that done. I have the notes for that, but I didn't get it all in, so I apologize for that. I don't really apologize for that. I'm doing my best. This is a volunteer effort at this point. So I will try to get that finished up and get all those dates in for you, just with one line, not with all the thing. I see I spelled Jehoiakim wrong. I spelled Jehoiachin wrong. It should be a J-E-H, not J-I-H. I'm doing it quick, trying to get everything accomplished. So, but that walks you through from basically Josiah, king of Judah, all the way until Jesus is born. That is a biblical history of the Jews in a nutshell. Somebody asked me, not anyone in this room right now, how do you do all that? And I do all that because I read stuff that most people don't read. Right? I read like the works of Josephus. This guy was writing in 70 A.D. When he was writing, so he actually sat on a hill and chronicled the siege of Jerusalem by Titus. So it's a first-hand account of that, and he is an excellent Jewish historian that walks through the history of the Jews. The Antiquities of the Jews starts off in the beginning. God created the heavens and the earth. It's really kind of cool. He's going all the way back to that. But anyway, that's how I get this stuff. It's just, and then I can read it. Fortunately, God gave me the ability to read it once and then remember it, and so that helps me a lot. So. That being said, where we were last week, we're looking at the pre-exile, exile, and post-exile, and then with an eye to a glance at the intertestamental period. We're going to do that, but I promise you it'll probably just be a very short glance at the intertestamental period because the more I've gotten through, the more I got another week, so I got more stuff. So we're going to be doing that. So last week we started off and we talked about how this time period really divides itself well into a series of threes. If you think three, you're going to be able to understand this. Three major prophets: Jeremiah, including Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Those are the three major prophets. Three history books, which would be Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, and three minor prophets: Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Those are the three sets of books that are there. Rather than this evening, I thought through this and thought maybe the better thing to do was, since we're reading chronologically, was to walk through them chronologically to try to give some a roadmap for where we're headed, some kind of definition to our direction. So that's kind of what we're going to do. But as we talked, you can also think of it in three exiles. And this is for Judah. Remember, Israel's gone. 722 BC, the northern nation Israel is gone. It's not going to be a nation ever again. But as far as Judah goes, there are three exiles: 605, 597 to 586. Those are the three exiles. They'll be listed here on our map. There are also three returns. There are three separate returns. One large return, or larger return, in 536 BC, when Zerubbabel and Joshua go back with 55,000. The second return is led by Ezra in, I think it's 453 BC. Ezra leads the second return. And he basically is going to reinstitute the Levitical system. They've been really operating under we'll talk about that. And then the third return is not a very large return at all. It's Nehemiah, who goes back with some of his buddies to rebuild the wall and to be governor there. That's the third return, and that's in about 445 BC. So those are the three returns, if you will, through the land, to the land. So really, again, it's really neat to me how it all works in threes. So to walk us through then, I'm just going to start off with that little handout I gave you. If you don't have one yet, Dave's got extras up here. There were some people who walked in. 640 BC is when Josiah becomes king of Judah. Josiah is really the last good king of Judah. He is the king who institutes significant reformation in worship and he is a good king. You'll find him in 2 Kings. You won't find him in Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, in those history books. You'll find him in 2 Kings. Significant events in history, in world history. In 627 BC, Ashurbanipal, the king of Assyria, dies, and Assyria begins to weaken. From that point on, Assyria is really falling off the scene. There is a series of, if you read Assyrian history, there are a series of pretenders to the throne who really weaken the throne, and actually, as they are trying to, there's so much infighting in Assyria that they begin to fall apart and begin to fade off of the scene. At the same time, you have the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, who are rising in power. Interesting question Dave Smith asked me last week, and I didn't notice it, but we haven't read Habakkuk yet, and we should have. We should have already read Habakkuk, because Habakkuk, and I say it weird, I know I do, but that's how it's spelled. H-A-B-A-K-K-U-K, Habakkuk. That's how you're supposed to say it. So he comes before the Chaldeans have risen to power. He is not a post-Chaldean, because we know this for sure. We know this from the biblical language, from the text, because as Habakkuk is complaining, it's one of my favorite books because he's the most honest prophet that we have. Because he starts off his book saying, "How long will I cry justice and you be deaf? How long will I do this and you don't hear? Things are terrible here. How long until you do something that you said you would do?" And God answers him saying, "I heard you, not long, because I am now raising up the Chaldeans." They haven't come to power yet, but they're being raised up. And so Habakkuk's complaint then is, "But how can you use somebody who's more evil than we are to judge us?" And God says, "Yeah, I know that, but I'm going to, then I'll judge them too." So everybody gets judged in the deal. So Habakkuk should have come before. I'm not sure when we're going to get to Habakkuk, but it should have already been here, because he should be pre-Chaldean or pre-Babylonian.
It's in about a week, so we're almost
Okay, we're almost there. So yeah, I think our folks who are doing this chronological study put him in the wrong spot. But that's what I think. I think it not just because I want to think that, but I think that textually we're driven to that conclusion as we go. So moving forward, 626 BC is when Jeremiah begins his ministry. That's when Jeremiah is called a prophet. Jeremiah is a prophet and a priest, and he begins his ministry as a prophet at that point. He's been serving as a priest and is called now to be a prophet, and he begins his prophetic ministry. We talked about him in detail last time, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on him at this point. So 626 BC is when that starts. Really, that begins the call out, that begins God's call to Judah, repent. He has given them illustration after illustration after illustration. He's shown them what happens in Nineveh, with Nineveh repenting and God relenting. He's shown them what happened in Israel, with Israel not repenting and them being destroyed. He showed them again what happened in Nineveh, when Nineveh failed to repent in Nahum, and they were then destroyed. So he's doing that, and he's showing things going on. And finally, the last real clear picture is when Nabopolassar, king of Babylon, conquers Nineveh, fulfilling Nahum's prophecy against them. So so now at 612 BC we have the beginning of the end of world history, if you will, and that's how it's laid out for us throughout through the prophet Daniel. Daniel lays out the beginning of the end of world history, and he lays it out really starting with the Babylonians. So as far as the big four in Daniel's prophetic calendar, and the big four for us to be concerned with, the big four are laid out, and they start with Babylon, as Nabopolassar now conquers Nineveh and begins to set his sights on the rest of the world. Significant things: 609 BC, Jehoahaz becomes king of Judah. Josiah is off the scene and dead. Jehoahaz, his son, becomes king, and Jehoahaz is a terrible king, terrible, evil king. Sometimes referred to as Ahaz as well. Sometimes when you're reading, you'll see Ahaz and Jehoahaz, the same guy. Actually, there's two Jehoahazes too, though, because there's a Jehoahaz in the north and a Jehoahaz here. This is the second Jehoahaz. So he's the one you read about in Chronicles. If you're reading about Jehoahaz in Chronicles, you can't be reading about a northern king. Chronicles doesn't cover the northern kings. It only covers the kings of Judah. So now a little trick, see? So I know which one that was now. Jehoahaz is a terrible king. And he doesn't last long. you'll notice in 609 BC, Jehoiakim becomes king. So he's king for less than a year. Jehoahaz is king for less than a year. Jehoiakim becomes king of Judah, and he serves as king for 5 years. In 605 BC, he serves for 9 years. It's under his reign that Nabopolassar first comes against Israel, or Judah, if you will, and takes captives captive. Daniel, one of those being taken in 605 BC. That's when Daniel is taken captive. It's in 605 BC. Under Nabopolassar, Nebuchadnezzar is the general, Nabopolassar is the king. So that's going. In 590, let me make sure I get my list right. I'm losing, my lines are. So then in 598 BC, Jehoiakim is deposed by Nebuchadnezzar, and Jehoiachin becomes the king of Judah. He doesn't do a very good job either, because in 598 BC, he becomes king. In 597 BC, Nebuchadnezzar, now king of Babylon, Nabopolassar is no longer king. Nebuchadnezzar is king, but Nebuchadnezzar didn't like to leave his fighting to somebody else. He went ahead and did his own fighting. So he came against Israel in 597 BC, comes against Jerusalem, and takes Jehoiachin out and puts Zedekiah in his place. Jehoiachin is actually taken back to Babylon and is placed under house arrest. And it actually said that he becomes a fast friend of Nebuchadnezzar. I think, why would that happen? Well, remember something happens in Daniel chapter 4, something happens to Nebuchadnezzar. I believe there's a real change in Nebuchadnezzar, and it's at the end of his life, Jehoiachin and Nebuchadnezzar appear to be friends. And in fact, Jehoiachin is given freedom to reign, to R-E-I, and not reign like king, but to go where he wants to go throughout all of Babylon. So there's a relationship change that happens there, I think largely due to what's going on in Nebuchadnezzar's life. But Jehoiachin is taken away. Zedekiah is placed in his spot in 597 BC. In 593 BC, we have Ezekiel beginning his ministry. Ezekiel begins his ministry in 593 BC, and he again is calling Judah to repent. It's already getting late. And Nebuchadnezzar's already come against. He's already taken people away. He's already they're vassal kings at best. But there still is a chance through what Ezekiel is doing. Remember we talked about Ezekiel's 3 divisions. Repent before it's too late. Hey, it's too late, but I'm going to rebuild you. That was the kind of the three ideas for Ezekiel. And so he does that. In 586 BC, it becomes too late. Because in 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar is really frustrated with the people, frustrated with Jews. You can read about that in the Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus' book. Where did I put that at?
It's on the chair.
Oh, there it is, right there. Josephus' book. You can read about that. And he comes and he destroys the city of Jerusalem, destroys its wall, destroys the temple. It said that one stone was not left standing on another, and that was a major undertaking because Solomon's temple was amazing. It was amazing. So it was willful, malicious, and on purpose. And then he leaves the city sowed with salt so that nothing will grow, and so it will be basically uninhabitable for a period of time. And that is the end of Jerusalem as we know it, really. In 561 BC, Jeremiah dies. In 560 BC, Ezekiel dies. Ezekiel was probably killed by a puppet prince that had been placed by Nebuchadnezzar that Ezekiel told the truth to again, and the guy said, "I don't like you," so he killed him. That's a bit of non-biblical history to get. Now, so in 560, from 560 to 538 BC, really you have one voice for Israel. That voice is Daniel. He's prophesying until about 536 BC. He's prophesying, we believe, our history tells us, the rabbinical history tells us that Daniel was actually prophesying up until the issue of the decree to go back. So why didn't Daniel go back? Because he's probably 90 years old at that point. Probably a 90-year-old man, and it's not an easy trip. It's not like you get on a bus and take a bus ride. It's a 5-month trip up around the Fertile Crescent to get back to Israel. It's not, you can't go straight across the desert. You have to go around the Fertile Crescent to get there. So that's largely why probably Daniel didn't go. So Daniel's the one voice, and we'll talk about If we get to the intertestamental period, we'll go back to Daniel. Promise on that one. So we're moving forward now. So in 538 BC, that's when Cyrus the Persian issues a decree to rebuild the temple. Foretold by Isaiah in 740 BC, Isaiah actually mentions him by name. That's why textual critics say it can't possibly be the case. There have to be 3 guys that wrote Isaiah, not 1 guy that wrote Isaiah, and that part has to come after the fact. Because they want to take the miraculous away. It's truly miraculous for God to actually say a name, mention a man by name to do this. But it is Cyrus who's mentioned 200 years before it happened, and it is Cyrus who issues the decree. It's interesting that in Isaiah's day, Cyrus is not even the name that would have been used. Cyrus is a Persian name. And who's in charge in Isaiah's day? The Assyrians are. It would not have been a Persian name. There's still the Babylonians are in the middle of that. So Cyrus issued a decree to rebuild the temple. And so in 536 BC, after they get everything together, Cyrus doesn't just issue the decree, but he gives to Zerubbabel this incredible gift. If you read the first part of Ezra, you'll see this great gift that Zerubbabel and Joshua are given. They're given money. They're given all the vessels for the temple back to take with them. Those things that Belshazzar had used and defamed, they're given back to them, and they're given permission to take them back. It's interesting that Cyrus offers Zerubbabel a protective guard to go with him, and Zerubbabel refuses that. He says, nope, God will protect us, and we'll go on our own. So they went on their own. Made the 5-month trip back, Zerubbabel and Joshua do, and they lead again. 55,000 are the people who go back. There's actually a numbering of them who goes back with names of families and stuff like that. And so 55,000-ish go back to reestablish Israel's presence in the land officially. What has happened while they were gone is the folks who were left there have taken over. They've come in and they've actually made themselves homes there. They've actually started living there. Some of the more popular names we're going to see as you read are a guy named Sanballat and a guy named Tobiah. They're both not nice people. They're not good people. And when we get to Nehemiah, we'll talk about Sanballat and Tobiah just a little bit. But they actually are really opposed to Israel coming back, and they send letters back and forth. They send letters back and forth to the king, to Darius and to Artaxerxes, asking for work to be stopped, asking for work to stop. And in fact, Darius hears them and says, yeah, it's not right that people are getting kicked out of their homes. Stop working. So there's this tension as they go back to get into and rebuild the temple. But in 536 BC, as they get back, they immediately begin to rebuild the temple. They rebuild the altar, they dedicate the altar, and they begin by laying the foundations of the temple. And then immediately after the foundations are laid, they experience significant trouble from outside. And there's actually a letter sent. You have a copy of it in Ezra. There's a letter sent that says stop work. And so rather than continuing to do what they stop working, they quit. And they don't quit for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. They quit for 16 years. They don't work. 16 years they don't work on the temple. So from 536 BC to 520 BC, you have no work on the temple. They're living in the land just as they are. In 520 BC, you have Haggai and Zechariah begin to prophesy, and their prophecy is really rebuild the temple. So now we're going to stop for a second on Haggai and Zechariah and spend some time with them. Haggai is only 3 chapters. No, 2 chapters. No, 3 chapters. No, how many chapters? And he is a get down to business kind of guy. He doesn't have a lot of flowery stuff. He doesn't talk a lot about the future. He talks about here and now. He is called the prophet who had a brick in one hand, and he was ready to preach and to work. And he calls the people to get busy working. That's what he's calling them to. He chastises them for God on their living in their paneled houses, them basically taking the stuff that had been given to accomplish the rebuilding of the temple, and they started using it in their own places. And Haggai, God through Haggai says, is it right for you guys to live in your paneled houses while I have no place? And so he encourages them to to get back to work. He tells them, you have been, you wonder why nothing's being prosperous. You wonder why you work for wages and you put them in pockets that have holes in them. You wonder why nothing is going well for you. It's because you've put yourself before me, so stop doing that. Put me first and I will bless you. Well, the people hear that, the people respond, and they get back to work. They get back to work. Alongside of Haggai is Zechariah, prophesying at exactly the same time, for exactly the same purpose. But Zechariah's prophecy is much more about, and when you do this, this is the future of Israel. This is what will happen for us. And so Zechariah is a forward-looking prophet. In Zechariah you have that they will look on him whom they have pierced as one mourns for an only son. That is Zechariah. The king entering on a white donkey, the foal of a colt, the foal of a donkey, that is Zechariah. Those are all Zechariah prophecies regarding the one who would come. Zechariah talks about future false shepherds that would present. And he talks about how the false shepherds would kill the good shepherd, a point to the Pharisees and Sadducees, Sanhedrin, killing the one who would come, who was the Lamb of God, who would take away the sin of the world. So Zechariah is a very forward-looking book, while Haggai is a very here and now book. As Haggai is prophesying and they start laying the foundation, they get partway done and they step back and they look, and especially the old folks who see that are broken, they're heartbroken, because they remember the glory of Solomon's temple, and the temple they're putting together is not near as glorious as Solomon's temple was. They didn't have the resources, they didn't have the manpower. They were putting together a small little temple that would basically accomplish what it needed to accomplish with regard to worship. That's what they were doing. And Haggai prophesies that this temple doesn't seem glorious at all. But this temple will receive much more glory than Solomon's temple ever did, because the Lamb of God would enter this temple. And some have said, well, Haggai got it wrong, because this isn't the temple. It's not the temple. Remember, the temple that Jesus went into is Herod's temple, right? But the foundation is the same exact temple. Herod just expanded on this same foundation. So it is the exact same temple. It's not, Haggai didn't get it wrong. Haggai got it exactly right. So that's Haggai and Zechariah. They're prophesying, rebuild the temple, get busy doing it, because not only is our future secure in who God is, but our present secure in who God is, but our future is glorious as we respond rightly to God. It is in Zechariah that you have the first mention of Israel's return to God on a spiritual basis, on a spiritual level. As Jesus comes back, it's in Zechariah that Jesus is going to step on the Mount of Olives, and there's going to be a great earthquake that splits the Mount of Olives in half. And there's going to be a river that forms from Jerusalem all the way to the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea is going to be made it's going to be made alive again. It's going to be no longer dead. Fresh water is going to be flowing into the Dead Sea. And it is Zechariah's prophecy, Zechariah that prophesies that. But along with that, he prophesies that at that point, Israel will look on their Messiah, and they will then by clan, by tribe, by clan, by family and person respond to him in faith. That's the basis for Paul in Romans chapter 11 saying, and all Israel will be saved. That's the basis for that statement, because it's actually prophesied in Zechariah that those living Israelites at that point will look on him whom they've pierced, they'll mourn for him, and there will be this national repentance on an individual basis is how I describe it. National repentance on an individual basis. That's covered in Zechariah. So those are probably Haggai and Zechariah. If I was to pick my two favorite minor prophets, they would be the two of them. I really like them a lot, because they're really encouraging the people to get busy, to stay busy. Zechariah talks about Zerubbabel and Joshua being these two olive trees, and they're basically there because God put them there. It's not an accident that they're there, and they're worth to be followed and listened to. That's Haggai and Zechariah. So as they prophesy, people don't wait around. They get busy. They do it. They begin to reconstruct the temple. It takes 4 years to finish the temple from that point. So in 516 BC, the temple is dedicated and completed and dedicated. Something significant about this dedication, something that's different than this dedication and in Solomon's dedication. If you remember, in Solomon's dedication, when the temple was dedicated, smoke came and filled the temple so that everybody had to leave. That never happens. It doesn't happen with this temple. It does not take place. There's no record of smoke ever entering this temple the way it did. The glory of God entered this temple, but it did when Jesus walked through the gate several hundred years later. So that's when the glory of God entered that temple. But it's completed and dedicated in 516 BC. So you have life going on two places. You have Jewish life happening in the land, and you have Jewish life happening in Babylon. They're both happening at the same time. They're going on. And there really is no connection. You don't have a record throughout this time period. You don't have a record of the 3 feasts that the Jews had to come back to Jerusalem for. That doesn't seem to be happening. Why does not have to be happening? Because they're failing and they're keeping the law. No, remember in the Babylonian captivity, that's when the synagogue system started, and so they've redone or re-emphasized and symbolized a lot of the temple worship to synagogue worship, and so the need to go home isn't necessarily there all the time, or the need to go back to Jerusalem isn't there all the time. So you really don't see that moving back or coming back much. Really, you have two separate Israels going on at the same time. In Israel, things are not, in Jerusalem, things are not good. The temple's rebuilt, but the wall is broken down. And they are really sitting ducks all the time. They have no formal army. They have no real king. They have a governor who is no more than a puppet. The governor, and the governor seems to be the direct descendant of David. Zerubbabel is one. How do you say his name? Shealtiel. They're direct descendants of David, and would have been king, except God took that away from them. Remember when they went into captivity, God says, "You'll not have a king on your throne until the king is on the throne." So they have governors, but no real king. They're never again established as a nation by themselves until May of 1948. That was the next time they become a nation, really, of their own. They're self-governing as a nation. So now, what's going on in Babylon? Well, in Babylon, we know that things are changing there too, because you have the history of Belshazzar and what goes on there. I have actually the dates listed for that. I don't have a printout for those. You're gonna have to wait for that printout. I do have it, and my intention is to do that. But in 539 BC, that's when Babylon goes away and Medo-Persia starts. We're actually going to hopefully get to Daniel in just a little bit and look at that. So there are several things. The Greeks are coming to power. They're battling the Persians at this point in about the 480s BC. Xerxes is the king of Persia. And the Greeks are the city-states. I'm sure when you read history, when you were like in school, you read about the Greek city-states, Sparta and Athens, and Sparta were the warriors. So it's at this time, it's in the 480s that if you have read about or understand the 300, that whole story, that is this time. That is Xerxes and his 300, or Xerxes and his go against the 300 Spartans. And the Spartans were just very much warriors. In fact, if you had a kid that when he was born didn't look like he was going to be a warrior, you would just kill him so you could have a warrior kid. That's how Sparta worked. But as they're doing that, then Esther becomes queen. In 483 BC is when Esther becomes queen. And Esther's a great story. I spent a year and a half preaching through Esther 1 week at a time, and Esther is an amazing story about the sovereignty of God, the providence of God. Ray talked a little bit about it in Sunday school this morning, but how God is the fingers in the glove of history. His hand orchestrates everything, and it's so neat to be able to see that in Esther from beginning to end. See God orchestrating all that history, from who Haman is to who Mordecai is to all of that. I'm going to park here just for a second because Esther is a really important book. All the seeming coincidences in the book of Esther that I think are important. Esther becomes queen because there is only one person who does anything right, I think, in Esther, and that's Vashti. As Xerxes or Ahasuerus, when you read Ahasuerus, that's Xerxes. Ahasuerus is the Persian title for king. So like you would say Ahasuerus Xerxes. Ahasuerus is the title, Xerxes is his name, okay? He called himself King of Kings and Lord of Lords. That's who he thought he was. He thought he was extremely powerful. He was a whacked out lunatic. And so you remember he's having this party one day, and he's had a 6-month-long party as he's planning a war, because the Persians thought the best planning they did was when they were stoned cold drunk. That was the best time they could plan, because the spirits were working through them. Okay, that's why they lost a lot of wars, I'm sure. But he asked Vashti to come dance for him in nothing but her crown. That's what the Hebrew indicates, in nothing but her crown. She refuses, and she's deposed. She's not just deposed, she's killed, because she stood up to the King of Kings. And it's that point that Esther then, through the pageant, let's call it, let's be nice, let's euphemize it and call it a pageant. It was actually debased and debauched. Esther becomes queen. It's interesting that Josephus tells us, it doesn't tell us in the Bible, but Josephus tells us that Mordecai was actually living in Babylon at the time. And when he heard about the thing, he actually moved from Babylon to Susa for Esther to take part in this contest. So he had intentions for this to happen. It's interesting, if you track Mordecai's line, Mordecai is from the tribe of Benjamin. I don't think that's any accident whatsoever. And if you look at the name of Mordecai's grandfather and his father, the next name in the line should have been Saul. I am convinced that Mordecai's Jewish name is Saul. Because if you just look at it when you get through reading that, it's the son of Kish, it should have been Saul, but he goes by Mordecai, because I think he's thrown off most everything that's Jewish, trying to get ahead in life. I think that's who Mordecai is. So Mordecai is a descendant of Benjamin. I think a direct descendant of Saul. And Haman, this is what a coincidence. Haman is a descendant of Agag, right? He's an Agagite. What do we know in our reading? What happened between Saul and Agag? You remember that? Saul was supposed to kill him. Saul was supposed to wipe him out. And did wipe most of them out, right? But apparently a few got away because Saul spared Agag, right? Now Samuel didn't spare Agag, right? Samuel just hacked Agag to pieces. He took Saul's sword and just diced him, sliced him, diced him, made a few Julian fries out of the guy, and he was done. But you have that history between Mordecai and Haman. But there's more history than that, because Mordecai is a descendant of Jacob. Who are the Agagites descendants of? Esau. That is exactly why Mordecai refuses to bow to Haman. Because no descendant of Jacob is ever going to bow to a descendant of Esau. Because I promise you, Mordecai has bowed to somebody. If he's not bowed to the king, he's dead. You did not bow to Xerxes when he walked past. You absolutely bowed to Xerxes. But Mordecai would not bow to Haman. So you have all that working, and you see, I think as you read, there's so much to read in God at work through that whole situation. It's really one of my favorite, it's one of my favorite books. Even though God's name is never mentioned. In the book of Esther, God's name is never mentioned, Jerusalem is never mentioned, prayer is never mentioned in any one of those, in any of that. But clearly, it's the most evident, you see God most evident in that book as you watch him orchestrate the events of history for the salvation of his people. Remember, what's going on back in Judah at this time? Back in Judah, they're defenseless. They have no wall, they have no army, they have no king. So what do you think and they have enemies. They have Sanballat and Tobiah and the Samaritans and those around who hate them and want them out of the way. What do you think would have happened if a decree would have gone forward that the Jews could be killed? What do you think would happen to every Jew in Judah, in Jerusalem? They would have been killed. So what would have happened to the line of Messiah? It would have been wiped out. What would it have done for our salvation? Would have pretty much ended it. So that's just neat to see how God works all that his way. So that in about 479 BC is actually when Haman's plan is eventually thwarted. About 4 years after Esther becomes queen.
Did you want us to hit us?
You can if you want to. We're not doing it. Oh, by the way, that is something we should say. One of the two non-biblical feasts non-Old Testament feast is established in this time, in about 479 BC. That's when Purim is established because of the whole Esther story. And they still celebrate Purim in great festivity today. Someday I'm going to go to a Purim feast just to have fun. It's like an old melodrama is actually what it looks like. In 473 BC, if you recall, early in the book, Mordecai overhears a plot from two of Xerxes' guards to kill him and thwarts that. Well, in 473 BC, no one overhears. And two of Xerxes' guards kill him and try to usurp power, try to take power, but they're not successful because Artaxerxes, Xerxes' son, becomes king in Persia. Artaxerxes is king for Ezra, and Artaxerxes is king for Nehemiah. That's who the king is Artaxerxes at that point. Artaxerxes is Xerxes' son. He becomes king in Persia, and he is king until the early 400s. In 453 BC, Ezra leads the second return. So the first part of Ezra is 1 through 7. That's the first return under Zerubbabel and Joshua. Then there is a significant gap between Ezra 7 and Ezra 6. I'm sorry, Ezra 6 and Ezra 7. There's a significant gap. Ezra 7 starts Ezra's return, and that's in 453 BC. So if Zerubbabel's return was in 536, 453, so it's about an 80-year gap. So it's a significant gap there. So understand this, they've been back in the land, they have the temple rebuilt, but really the establishment of worship isn't really going that well. It hasn't been established. And so Ezra, being a priest, Ezra is a priest, he takes a group of the priests and scribes and he takes them back to reinstitute real temple worship, to do sacrifices the way sacrifice is going to be done, to do the law the way law is going to be done. And so that's what Ezra is doing in his return, the second return, the last part of the book of Ezra, 453 BC. In conjunction with that, you have Nehemiah. Ezra and Nehemiah kind of operate together as well. They're working together there at the same time. Ezra being the religious leader, Nehemiah being the political leader. Nehemiah is happy to be Artaxerxes' cupbearer. How does a Jewish guy get that position in a Persian kingdom? How does a Jewish guy get to be the cupbearer in a Persian kingdom? Well, maybe because the queen mother is a Jew. What we would call the queen mother, named Esther at that point. So I'm sure she had connections, she put people in place. So that's probably how Nehemiah got his position. Nehemiah, at the beginning of the book, he receives a visit from his brothers who live there, and they say, things are bad, man. Things are really bad. We're sitting ducks, basically is what he says. The walls are broken down, they're burned with fire, we can't get them reestablished, we can't get them, there's no one really doing a good job of leading back here. It's bad. Nehemiah is cut to the quick because of that, spends some time praying, and I love his confession. One of the things that I really get from Nehemiah is how to confess sin. How to confess sin not just for yourself, but Nehemiah takes on himself the responsibility for his father's sin. I love his prayer of confession there. And then he asks, as he prays the prayer of confession, the next thing he does is say, and give me favor as I go in and talk to this guy. Because I'm going to make an ask that I don't know if I'm going to get or not. We know the story. Nehemiah goes in with a sad face, putting his life on the line, because you didn't want to make the king unhappy. And if your sad face made the king sad, he would just have you killed. That's the way the Persian kings were, great people. But he's asked why his face is sad. He tells Artaxerxes what's going on, and he actually is sent into Jerusalem to rebuild the wall in 445 BC. In 445 BC, the wall is rebuilt in 58 days. 58 days. If you've ever gone to Israel with us and you've gone to the city of David, as you're going down the little walkway, you can look back, you actually see a portion of Nehemiah's wall that still stands today. That was a 58-day project, still standing. Good construction there. But Nehemiah is only given permission to go for a while. He's not given permission to stay there forever. And so he has to go back. And so about 433 BC, Nehemiah goes back to Susa. He's gone for about 10 years. In that 10-year period that he's gone, things fall apart again. things fall apart miserably. The priesthood is no longer taken care of by the people. The way they're doing worship goes really haywire again. There's a lot of marrying, putting away the wives of their youth, and marrying younger, good-looking Samaritan women. Things that are going on. It's really bad. One of the high priests actually has married a Samaritan woman, and her dad is named Tobiah. And in order to help out Tobiah, he's actually, where the storeroom should be, full of stores for the temple and for the priests, he's actually cleaned those out and put Tobiah a little apartment in there. So Tobiah, a Samaritan, is living in the temple instead of outside the temple. So things have gone really bad. It's at that point, in about 425 BC, when things are really bad in that 10-year time period, that Malachi begins to prophesy. Malachi prophesies, and he's the last prophet, as a matter of fact. He prophesies of the things they're doing and calls them to repent, calls them away from it. As he starts his prophecy, I think he starts, we don't know this for sure, but if you look what Malachi talks about, because Malachi doesn't date himself. He doesn't say, in the 5th year of, he doesn't do that. But if you look at the things Malachi is prophesying against, and you look at the thing that Nehemiah goes back in chapter 10 of Nehemiah when he institutes reforms, the exact things that Malachi is prophesying against are exact things that Nehemiah takes care of. So it fits, historically, it seems to fit really, really well. So Malachi says, you've robbed me how we robbed you. Really, it's a condemnation of complacency, is what I think Malachi is all about. And it is Malachi. He's not Italian. It's not Malachi. It's Malachi. In 424, Nehemiah comes back the second time, institutes reforms, has people put away their foreign wives. They get their other wives back. There's this reinstitution of worship the way it's supposed to be done. There's a return to God, and then from 424 BC to about 5 BC, there's biblical silence. Nothing in the Bible, no revelation from God, no direct conversation from God to somebody else until this priest named Zacharias is serving at the altar of incense in the temple on his round, and the angel appears to him and says to him, "I've heard your prayer, and I'm sending an answer." So it's about 419 years of silence that God gives to them. 5 BC, the angel visits Zacharias. 4 BC, the angel visits Mary and Joseph. And in 4 BC, Jesus is born. Somebody asked, that doesn't make sense. I thought Jesus would have been born in 0, right? Shouldn't he have been born in 0? Well, you understand that the Julian calendar is a contrivance of man. It's not, it wasn't somebody actually there said, you know what, Jesus was born on this date. Let's start now. That's not what happened. It was somebody figured, well, let's do it then. If you look at historically, when the decree of Augustus was issued, and Cyrus was governor in Syria, that is 4 BC. So we have a historical documented event that we know when that happened, and it's actually recorded in the Bible that this is when that happened. It's 4 BC that happened. So we know Jesus was born in 4 BC. Some have suggested he was born on April 1st of 4 BC. If you do the math backwards, you can actually see that. I don't know. He wasn't born on December 25th. I can pretty much tell you that. So that is a walkthrough chronologically of the exile, the pre-exile, exile, and post-exile chronologically in a nutshell. And that was clearly a nutshell. I understand that. The best way to understand the intertestamental period is to look at Daniel and look at the 4 kingdoms that Daniel prophesied. Daniel. Actually, in the Jewish Bible, Daniel is considered an historical book, not a prophetical book. It's not a prophecy. It's history. But as the folks who put our canon together in 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea put the canon together and showed Daniel as a prophetic book because it is full of prophecy. It's full of prophecy. And probably the best way to understand the intertestamental period is to look at Daniel's prophecy of the beginning of the end of Israel. He starts off, and the first time we see this prophecy is in Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has his dream. He sees this statue, right? Statue with a head of gold, with a chest and arms of silver, with a waist of bronze, and then with legs and feet and toes of iron, and then iron mixed with clay. That's the picture that he sees, and he's really disturbed about it. Doesn't tell anybody, won't tell anybody, and so no one can do it. He's going to kill all of the magi, and then Daniel says, "I can do it. God will give it to me. God will reveal it to me what it is." Daniel does. He talks about 4 kingdoms. The 4 kingdoms are Babylon. Babylon existed from 612 BC, really, as they overthrew Assyria in 612 BC, to 539 BC. 539 BC is the party that Belshazzar is having, and he makes the mistake of going and getting the temple vessels and using them for his party. And it's at that point that God says, "No, I've had enough. I've had enough." And he says to him, "Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. You're weighing the balances. You've been found wanting. Tonight your kingdom is taken away." And it's that very night, unbeknownst to Belshazzar, while he's inside the wall party thinking, "We're impenetrable, no one can get in," the Medes and Persians have dammed up the aqueduct, made that stop flowing, have walked in underneath the wall, and take him out that very night. It is that very night that he's taken out. The major kings of the Babylonian Empire are Nabopolassar, Nebuchadnezzar, Nabonidus, and Belshazzar. You won't see Nabonidus' name in the Bible. Because it's interesting, up until about 40 years ago, you didn't see Belshazzar's name in history. And that was one of the things that said, see, the biblical account is wrong. The biblical account is wrong because there's no such king as Belshazzar. And there is no such real king as Belshazzar. Because his dad was king. Nabonidus was king. And actually, I think it was about 40 years ago, they found a stone with an inscription about Belshazzar being king, proving that the Bible was actually more accurate than the historians thought that they were. So Belshazzar was kind of a sub-region underneath Nabonidus. But he's the one that brought the destruction upon Babylon. Second kingdom is Medo-Persia. And so the kings that are significant there, that have biblical significance, would be Darius. Darius is the king who Daniel throws Daniel in the lion's den. That's the king. Cyrus, important because he issues a decree to rebuild the temple. Darius is second, significant because he's the one that starts the wars between Persia and Greece. He's the one that really starts those wars and is trounced. And it's because he tells his son Xerxes that he was treated unfairly, basically. Xerxes takes that cause and makes it his mission to destroy the Greeks. Doesn't do a very good job of it because they eventually destroy him. Xerxes and Artaxerxes are the kings that matter there. Then we move from Medo-Persia to Greece, and this is where we start to get into the intertestamental period. Major Greek kings, 331 to 146 BC. I give you the dates for Medo-Persia. It's 539 to 331, really. Greece is 331 to 146 BC. Major king, there's going to be Philip of Macedonia, who really starts the war machine going. Starts the idea of conquering the world. And his son Alexander the Great, is the one who actually accomplishes that. But it's a short-lived conquering of the world because the very night, history tells us, the very night that he conquered the world, he drank himself to death. He died of alcohol poisoning that very night. And so he had no heir. He had no child. He had a child, but the child was mentally deficient. And so the child couldn't be king. And I think actually the child got killed early on because of that. They knew he couldn't be king. And so rather than having an heir, the kingdom of Greece was divided between Alexander's 4 generals. Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. The two that really matter to us are Ptolemy and Seleucus. Those are the two generals that matter because they're the ones who battled for control of the Israel area. See, I needed another week. So I would love someday to talk about that battle. So let's just do this real quick. So the key figures in that are Antiochus the Great. He is the one who actually finally took control of the land that from the Ptolemies to the Seleucids. So anytime you read Antiochus, he's a Seleucid king. Anytime you read Ptolemy, He's a Ptolemaic king, okay, or Ptolemaic governor, and they come from those generals. All the Ptolemies ended up naming themselves Ptolemy 1, Ptolemy 3, Ptolemy 4, Ptolemy 5. So they're all Ptolemies, of course, Ptolemy, I think is how you spell that. And then you have the Antiochuses. The Antiochuses are the Seleucids, and they were the ones in battle. But it was Antiochus the Great that finally got control of that area and took it for the Seleucids, and it never left them until Rome took it from them. Okay? The other major figure that is a Seleucid general or Seleucid king would be Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes, he named himself that, by the way. It wasn't like Epiphanes isn't his last name. Epiphanes means the enlightened one like God. He called himself, thought himself to be God, acted like he was God. He's the one who was king when Judas the Maccabees started into existence. And it's under him, he prohibited temple worship. And so at one point he actually cut off all the oil for the temple. So they couldn't have oil for the temple. And so legend says, rabbinical legend says, that for 8 days the lampstand in the temple burned without any other oil. That's rabbinical legend. For 8 days the lamp burned in the temple without any oil. Because at the end of 8 days they were able to get oil supplies back in and stuff like that. So that is where we get Hanukkah. That's why Hanukkah is an 8-day festival. That's why the menorah for Hanukkah has 8 posts, not 7 posts. The temple lampstand has 7. A Hanukkah lampstand has 8. Actually, it may have 9, right? It's got 9 because it's got the one in the middle. That's why, because there are 8 days of continuous light. That's why Hanukkah is an 8-day festival, because 8 days of light. So you got that for free, and that was under Judas Maccabees, Judas the Hammer. They actually led a revolt against Antiochus. Okay, and then you have Rome, 146 BC to 476 AD is Rome, and vestiges of the Roman Empire still exist today. The European Union is part of the old Roman Empire. There's a lot of it left, and I think it will reestablish itself. I think that's the head, one of the heads in Revelation. I'd love to be able to tie it all together, but I can't do that in 2 minutes. Pompey is a general that really started Rome's success, started taking stuff. Then Julius Caesar, the one who centralized power under the Caesar, away from the Senate. It is Julius Caesar that he lets another guy named Herod rule and become king in Israel. That's significant because Herod is an Edomaean. He's a descendant of Edom, Esau. And so in order to endear himself, Herod begins this great reconstruction project for the temple. And he starts that in about 6 BC, or before that, 26 BC, and he doesn't even finish that by the time the temple's destroyed in 70. So it's a thing. And then the Augustus is a key figure in history because he's the one that issues a decree for Jesus to be born in Bethlehem. So, all right. I still have 3 pages of notes. So David asked, would there be time for questions? Simple answer is no. If you want to email me a question, I'd be happy to try to answer it. You got 600 years. How are you supposed to do that in 15 minutes? I'm going to pray and then let you guys go. Lord, thank you for the time together tonight. Thank you for your word. Thank you for how you work through history, how you orchestrate events for our redemption. And thank you for loving us the way you do. We ask this in your name. Amen. Thanks for your attention. I think it's